Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, welcome to the committee. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you.
I believe one of the most important books written in the 20th century was The Guns of August. And as you know, the thesis of the book was that we stumbled into World War I by miscalculation, mistake, misunderstanding, and a complicated web of treaties in Europe that led to a world war that no one anticipated, the depth of which certainly no one wanted. How do we communicate to the Russians the essential defensive nature of NATO? My concern is that what we view as deterrence and reassurance, they could view as provocation, particularly in light of the fact that we're dealing with a country which is historically paranoid about the West. And Vladimir Putin clearly thinks that there's a danger of an invasion by NATO. Talk to me about how we diminish this substantial risk of a miscalculation. Vladimir Putin just made some huge miscalculations in Ukraine. What if he makes a similar miscalculation about what we're doing in Poland or Finland or Sweden or other NATO countries? Give me some thoughts on the danger of a mistake triggering a worldwide conflagration.
Senator, the danger of a mistake or a miscalculation looms very high in our consciousness every day in U.S. Eucom. And we have a process by which we review every operation, activity, or investment that we're conducting in order to gauge gauge how it will be viewed by our adversaries and by Russia in particular, and then whether or not we should proceed with it given what our various goals are at that point. Yeah, it's a delicate balance, Senator, and it's a delicate balance because one must not shy away from activity that we need to do to stay strong and to make sure we outline our priorities of what we will defend, but it's also necessary not to overdo that and create a problem where a problem wasn't. So we work very, very hard on that, Senator, and clearly we have not hit that point yet.
Well, I want to be clear. I support the European Reassurance Initiative. I support what we've done in Ukraine and what we're doing in Poland and Eastern Europe and bringing new countries into NATO. I think the important thing here, and perhaps we talked about diplomacy a little earlier, is to communicate that this is defensive. Yeah. And I just think that is an important point. And I guess my follow-up question is, do you have, as Supreme Commander of NATO, do you have a communication link with your counterpart in Russia in order to de-escalate not a conflict, but a potential conflict?
Yeah, so to continue with the last point, sir, first, if I may, transparency, that communication is vital. So in my current position, when we conduct our large-scale exercises such as Defender, we go to the OSCE. I send officers to the OSCE. They outline the entire exercise, the objectives, the major movements, and things like that. So in addition to my previous answer, I should add transparency, which I think we work very hard on.
Transparency to the Russians?
To the Russians and to everybody. Yeah, absolutely, sir. We're not hiding anything with these.
And do you have a red phone?
The Supreme Allied Commander has a venue of communication with his counterpart in the Russian Federation.
I'm sorry, you said you do have communication?
The Supreme Allied Commander has that.
Thank you. That's reassuring. A short question. All of us are supportive of the arms and the support that we've been giving to the Ukrainians, both humanitarian and military. Looking beyond the current conflict, however, there will be a huge amount of arms in this relatively small country. Yeah. We spent 30 or 40 years chasing man-pads that we gave to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Is there any oversight or accountability of where all these weapons are and where they might be? It worries me that not the Ukrainians, but that they could fall into the hands of terrorists or other malefactors in the region. Senator,
establishing accountability over where all of that equipment is a vital task for us. It's challenging right now, of course, because we're not in the country, but as the conflict winds down or concludes, that will be one of the things that I have to get at, especially if I'm confirmed into the next position. I share your concern on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General, thank you.
Senator.
Thank you and your family. Very much appreciated our discussion yesterday. I believe you are exceptionally well qualified for this position. I'd like you to brag a little bit, if you don't mind. Can you just let the committee and the American people know some of your background and experiences and education as it relates to Russia?
Asking me to brag is the hardest question you could ask me, Senator.
Go ahead. We want you to brag. I want you to brag.
So
Very impressive. Just Russia focus, education.
Sure. I graduated Princeton in 1987, where I did not look at Russia. I graduated with a degree in biology. I entered the Army. I immediately was stationed in Italy with the Parachute Infantry Battalion. In that role, we studied Russia closely because that was our main opponent during the end of the Cold War. As I came out of company command, sir, I became a Russian Foreign Area Officer. My wife and I studied Russian together at the Defense Language Institute for a year. Then I went to...
So you speak Russian?
I do, yes, I do.
And you've studied Russian military history, Russian
Absolutely.
strategy,
I got a degree
Russian
from
tactics.
Yale University in Russian.
You've
and
had
East
billets
European
that have
studies.
solely focused on Russia?
I have lived in Moscow for months at a time. I have traveled all over the former Soviet space. I have had fellowships at the George Marshall Center.
In Germany?
In Germany. I was on the Russia desk for the Joint Staff.
So I would say Russia desk for the Joint Staff?
I was, sir.
So that's every day getting up, focusing on Russia's, the challenges.
Absolutely, Senator.
So I would say you are Vladimir Putin's worst nightmare and couldn't be more qualified than probably any other member of the military. So again, I want to thank you for your service. Can you clearly define succinctly, because I have a bunch of questions, our top strategic goals in Ukraine?
Yes, Senator. We want Ukraine to emerge from this conflict independent and free. We want the NATO alliance to be unified and as strong as ever. And we want to do these things without engaging in a war with Russia.
Thank you. You know, there's a lot of discussion you've already said about NATO being energized, unified. I'm a huge supporter of NATO. I was actually at NATO headquarters right after the invasion in February. I was a big supporter of EDI. I'm a supporter of the Finland-Sweden accessions, supported a robust military. Disappointed that the President once again put forward a budget that cuts defense spending in real dollars. I supported U.S. economic and military aid since February, $54 billion. But I do want to say here, and hopefully some of our NATO allies are watching this hearing, there's grumbling out there. My constituents in Alaska are probably the most pro-military constituents, Americans in the country. But the grumbling relates to this question. Why is the U.S. spending more to defend Europe than Europe is spending? And by that I mean dating back to President George W. Bush, President Obama, President Trump, President Biden, all have put forward this goal of 2% of defense spending as a percentage of GDP, which was agreed upon in the 2014 Wales Summit by all members. And yet right now, we're down to 8 members out of 30. That's actually down from 10 last year, who have met that goal. Very wealthy countries, Sweden, Canada, Germany, France, haven't met that goal. Many of them are not even close to meeting that goal. What can we do? Well, isn't it now or never that the NATO countries should meet this goal? And I don't believe this is a sustainable situation. We're doing all we can. I fully support it. But my goodness, the American people are looking and saying, where is everybody else? How come these countries can't meet this goal that they've been agreeing to for decades? What's your sense on this? Do we have an opportunity here? I'm working on legislation that would say within 5 years, if NATO countries don't meet their 2% goal, then Congress will not appropriate dollars for training and deployments to those particular countries. What do you think about something like that? And if you're confirmed, will you be very focused on assuring that these countries understand that we're a democracy too? And at a certain point, the American people are going to say, enough. Europe has to defend Europe as much as America has to defend Europe. What do you think of all those issues?
Senator, if I'm confirmed, I will work on burden sharing as hard as I can. I am a believer in the Wales Pledge. I'm a believer not just in the 2%, but on the 20 and 80 part of the rule, which says that nations should spend at least 20% on modernization and acquisition. I am gratified right now that we hear so many positive movements
Germany's
in the
announcement
alliance.
was great.
It's really a great moment. If I'm confirmed, a big part of my job will be to help our diplomats and the interagency of the United States to convert all of those good intentions into facts.
What about legislation I'm working on right now?
Sir, if you
Do you
don't
have a
mind,
personal view on that?
I'd rather not comment on legislation directly, if you don't mind, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Sullivan. Senator Horono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, General. Thank you for your continuing service. In determining fitness to serve of nominees who come before any of the committees on which I sit, I ask the following two initial questions. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No, ma'am.
General, talking about burden sharing, what countries are welcoming or taking in the millions of refugees from Ukraine?
Senator, that's an amazing story and a heartwarming one. As you know, early on, my command was directed to prepare for assistance for Americans coming out, but also we anticipated needing to help with the large number of refugees we anticipated. We correctly anticipated about 6 million refugees coming into Europe. It was unnecessary. The people of Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia have opened their doors and opened their hearts to Ukrainian refugees. In fact, I have some local national employees in Poland who 3 of them who have Ukrainian families in their homes right now. It's been a remarkable thing to see the societies mobilize to assist Ukrainians.
I think it is an amazing and heartwarming story. So even as we talk about monetary commitment to NATO, there are many other ways that our European allies are stepping up regarding what is happening in the Ukraine. I think it's important to remember that. And I'm glad that Senator Sullivan asked you to talk about your background, because it is indeed impressive, and I think you are highly, highly qualified for this position that we are considering you for. I feel like asking you to answer some questions in Russian, but that's okay. I think it's a really difficult language to learn, and I commend you for that kind of focus. On Sunday, a delegation of U.S. diplomats is set to travel to The Hague for talks with allies, and I'm quoting the State Department, regarding our responses to atrocities committed in Ukraine and in other conflicts, and on efforts to bring the perpetrators of atrocities to justice. If confirmed, how will you assist the International Criminal Court in holding Russia accountable for the alleged war crimes being committed in Ukraine?
Senator, if I'm confirmed, I will execute the U.S. policy as it stands with regard to that at any given time. Clearly, this is an issue that has been considered in our policy making circles for some time, and I would have to follow U.S. policy.
I think it is very important for Russia to be held accountable for the atrocities that they're committing, and of course, this totally unprovoked war on an independent country. Last Saturday, President Biden signed a $40 billion package of new military and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. This includes a vast array of military defensive weaponry, such as anti-aircraft and anti tank systems, which the Ukrainians urgently need to protect themselves. If confirmed, how will you ensure the continuing coordination of the rapid transfer of U.S. resources and weapons to Ukraine and consider the country's future to defend future defense needs against Russia?
Senator, if I'm confirmed, I will continue to execute the way it's being executed right now with improvements and modifications as we go forward. So currently, at a policy level, our nation consults with other nations on what they might contribute. We consult with the Ukrainians on what they need, and then we try to bring those together. We hand that to U.S. European Command, which coordinates the logistics of it, and then ultimately all of the U.S. contributions come through the hands of my forces who are located in southeastern Poland, and they move it into the right locations. So I think we'll continue to do it that way. I think the accounting of all of this is going to be of great importance, Senator. I think understanding where everything is and being able to account for the money that's been provided will be a very important part if I'm confirmed.
Yes, as Senator Warren also mentioned, that there is going to be so much money that will be needed to help Ukraine and the aftermath, that yes, we do need to make sure that this money is going where it's supposed to go for the purposes for which we're appropriating the funds. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have some other questions that I will submit for the record.
Thank you, Senator Roanoke. Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, good to see you again. I enjoyed our conversation the other day, and congratulations on your nomination. Let me start with NATO, which is much the topic of conversation this morning. Of course, we may soon be asked to consider and vote on NATO expansion. You and I talked about this a little bit when we met. Let's start with the Wales Pledge. You're familiar, of course, with the Wales Pledge. You've talked about it, I know, today. Our current ambassador to NATO, Julie Smith, prior to her confirmation, sent me a letter in which she said, for the record, that it was her opinion that NATO allies should spend more than 2% of GDP on defense. In other words, to go beyond the Wales Pledge. The vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs said the same. Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, Celeste Wallander, also said the same to me, that allies should go beyond the Wales Pledge. So let me just ask you, in your personal opinion now, is it time for NATO allies to move beyond the Wales Pledge and increase defense spending above 2%?
Senator, I really liked the ambassador's formulation on that. She has been saying 2% is a floor, not a ceiling, and I agree with that. I know all of the land forces chiefs in NATO. Each one of them has a list of requirements. The requirements are all would all take more than 2% of GDP. So I am an advocate of spending more than 2%, at least 2%. So great. I agree, yeah.
Good. Thank you. When we talked last week, you told me that you didn't expect Finland's and Sweden's admission to NATO to result in U.S. force requirements in Europe. I've seen since then reports that Sweden is requesting a greater U.S. naval presence in the Baltic Sea. Also seeing reports the Pentagon plans to keep 100,000 plus troops in Europe for the foreseeable future. I just want to revisit this topic that you and I discussed in light of those reports. I mean, given this, how confident are you that Finland's and Sweden's accession to NATO would not result in U.S. forces doing more in Europe than we're currently obligated to under our current NATO commitments?
So the 100,000 forces in Europe that are being extended, that's part of the surge that we performed over the last few weeks, Senator, and was not related to the question of Finland and Sweden joining NATO. I remain of the opinion, as I told you in our office call, that at least in the ground domain, that this is not going to be a requirement for large additional forces or additional forces. I think exercises and occasional presence, like we do with any ally, will increase.
Different basing requirements, do you think? I mean, will there be, will this necessitate a shift in posture by our forces or NATO forces?
I don't know right now, and I would point out that the word basing carries with it an enormous number of other implications that I would have to consider deeply before I came back to you with a firm response on basing.
Well, since you mentioned coming back, if you're confirmed, would you commit to providing the committee with a full account of the implications of Finland's and Sweden's potential accession to NATO force, to the implications for U.S. forces in Europe should they accede to NATO, so that we can consider that as part of any debate we might soon have in this chamber over NATO expansion?
Senator, I would be happy to do that if I'm confirmed.
Great, thank you. Still on this general topic, burden sharing. You and I talked about this with our NATO allies, and then vis-a-vis what we need to do in the Asia Pacific with regard to China. We're going to have to do a lot more burden sharing with our NATO allies, is my view, in Europe, if we're going to focus as we need to on PACOM. Let me just put it to you this way. Do you think our European allies should assume primary responsibility for conventional deterrence in Europe, with us, of course, the United States providing extended nuclear deterrence and more select conventional capabilities, but Europe really focusing on everything else as we shift scarce resources to China? What do you think about that?
Senator, I think it's imperative, as we look at the emergence of the threat of China, for us to find ways to be able to handle the acute threat of Russia in a collective fashion with the alliance that allows us to do that. There are a number of different ways that could play out. Almost all of those ways include increased burden sharing on the part of the alliance, on the part of other members of the alliance, I should say. But they also depend on what the security situation in Europe is like at the end of this conflict. So really, this conflict and the way it comes out is going to drive a lot of my answer to your question. It's just premature for me to talk about it.
Here's my last question. My time's expired, so I'll ask it, and I'll let you answer and yield. What are some of the capabilities that we currently provide in Europe that you think European allies could feasibly contribute instead going forward?
Sir, some of the things we provide are heavy equipment and armor. Our allies could provide some of that. In many cases, it should be modernized first or in larger quantities. We provide long-range fires and logistics. We would encourage the development of those capabilities across the alliance, and then probably most importantly, increased air and missile defense across the alliance would be welcome contributions in terms of capability. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator Hawley. Senator King, please.
Thank you.
Senator Kelly, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to follow up on Senator Hawley's line of questioning here, General. And great to see you again, and thank you for your willingness to continue to serve our nation. Eucom obviously presents some unique and difficult challenges right now, and it's clear that the conflict in Ukraine is going to have a lasting impact on the future of European security. That's why I think it's important to continue to look ahead, and I appreciate the discussion we had in my office last week. And we talked a little bit about the Ukrainian military needs looking forward, from equipment to training to structural reforms. It's clear that these things are going to take some time. And I feel that if we want to deter further aggression beyond this conflict from Putin or somebody else like him in the future, we need to start thinking about this right now. And as we think about the future of the Ukrainian Air Force, I think, a centerpiece is not going to be the MiG-29. Needs to be a U.S.-built or a Western fighter, something like the F-16 might be a good option here. And over the last few years, we've successfully sold F-16s to some of our partners in the Middle East. And in the state of Arizona, the 162nd Air National Guard Wing has extensive experience training foreign pilots. They've been doing this for years, and that's pretty much all they do. They're currently helping Slovakia, as an example, transition from obsolete and, as we've seen, often ineffective Soviet aircraft like the MiG-29 to the F-16. So, General, can you provide your thoughts on how the U.S. and our allies can help modernize Ukraine's military to deter future aggression, and specifically with, looking towards their Air Force?
Thanks, Senator. Yes. First of all, as with a previous question, I think that Ukraine's military requirements at the end of this conflict are going to depend largely on what the shape of the security landscape is at the conclusion of the conflict, and what threat they face and how much threat they face. So the first thing I would say is that. The second thing I would say is that the aid we have been giving them is very important, and is very important to what they're doing, but it is going to require some rationalization on the far side, I would say. There will probably need to be some homogenization of fleets. For example, it's hard to have 5 or 6 different type of a tank or howitzer, Senator. So I think that will be something that's very important to do right away. With regard to the air domain, I think that I think that Ukraine is going to have to sit down with us, examine the security situation they have, and sketch out a strategy for a way ahead. I can't say what it would look like now, but I do look, if I'm confirmed, to coming back and to talking to you about it in the future, because I think it's a critical question for them.
All right.
And us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. There's going to be a lot of tough decisions. Certainly the agreement, whatever this final, depending on how this concludes, is going to play a big role in what the security cooperation looks like.
It will, yes.
And what the reforming of their military looks like here in future years. Another issue we discussed was the possibility of permanently basing more U.S. troops in Eastern Europe, an issue that many of us have advocated for, and I understand there are multiple factors to consider when making this sort of decision. So, General, what are your thoughts on the possibility of permanently stationed U.S. forces in Eastern Europe? And specifically, where would you, right now, where are you starting to think about where they could go? And obviously the reason is to deter future Russian aggression here.
Senator, so as we flowed additional forces in over the last few months, and as NATO has repostured NATO forces, multinational forces over the past couple of months, clearly what's been happening is the center of gravity of the NATO force has been shifting eastward. Depending on the outcome of the conflict, we may need to continue that for some time. We'll have to see at the end of the conflict. With regard to how those guys are sourced, how are those soldiers sourced? Permanently, rotational, unaccompanied tours? Boy, so many things go into that, Senator. A lot of the questions are service equities. A lot of the questions are policy matters. And I will have a voice in that, I'm sure, if I'm confirmed. But there will probably be a lot of other considerations that go into that.
I was recently in Poland and Germany,
Yes, sir.
and I think, especially with the Poles, it's going to be an important conversation to have. They are very interested in a stronger alliance and a possibility of a commitment to U.S. forces in Poland.
We
Thank you.
discuss it together frequently, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Cavoli, welcome to the committee. Thank you for your service. I've had a number of questions related to Ukraine, but they've been asked, and I don't want to ask you to keep repeating answers to questions related to that. So I have a few other questions and some outside areas I'd like to ask you in this time. General, the U.S. Special Operations Command Europe announced the basing of a new Special Operations headquarters in Albania. Just weeks prior to the Russian invasion. My question for you, sir, is in conjunction with SOCOM's efforts, how do you see NATO and Eucom complementing this increased partnership with what is really a critical ally in a very challenging part of Europe?
Senator, so last year we conducted a large portion of the Defender large-scale exercise in Albania. It was U.S. Army Europe exercise, but it was augmented and critically augmented by the U.S. Navy and Naval Forces Europe and Air Forces Europe as well. It had a huge effect, a huge positive effect. On the back of that, we have increased our activities with our Albanian allies fairly significantly. Sakir's addition of a base down there is an example of that. If I'm confirmed as the Eucom commander, I will continue to pay close attention to the levels of our presence and the amount of interaction we have with our allies and our partners in the Balkans. I think it's critically important.
Great. Well, that's great to hear. Great to hear. General, to stay with the theme of partnerships, I'm proud to represent the Michigan National Guard state partnerships in Latvia, as well as Liberia, two programs that I expect you know well, given your current position as commander of the U.S. Army, both in Europe and in Africa. Every commander I've talked to, including General Walters, has praised the state partnership program. And my question for you is, if confirmed as the commander of the most powerful alliance in the world, how will you leverage the National Guard Bureau's programs to achieve your objectives?
Senator, in my current role, we use and leverage the state partnership programs every day. And if I'm confirmed, you will be able to add me to the list of combatant commanders who love the state partnership program. I have a two-star deputy who is from the National Guard, and he liaises constantly with the tags who have state partnerships in our area. And it's absolutely invaluable. The depth of the relationships they have, the continuity of relationships they have has all been very, very important to us in crises as well as in peacetime. So it's an extremely valuable program. If I'm confirmed as the Eucom commander, I look forward to adding the Air Guard portion of that to my portfolio.
Oh, that's great. Great to hear, General. General Cavoli, on Sunday, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan announced a border commission as a possible step forward towards a peace plan in Nagorno-Karabakh. And while Russia certainly has made it very clear to the entire world that its words and its commitments cannot be trusted as a result of their horrific actions that we're seeing in Ukraine right now. But having said that, they did play a role in the discussions in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. And so my question for you is, if confirmed, how do you see Eucom and NATO influencing conditions to enable peace in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, given Russia's involvement in that area?
Yes, Senator, that is a prickly question. In the Caucasus in general, I have spent quite a bit of time down there and studied it and dealt with our partners down there. Almost every issue has several different angles on it. The Russian angle is always one of the ones that needs to be considered. In any given proposal or any given situation, if I'm confirmed, I would sit down and I would examine it very closely from all angles I could before coming up with my best recommendation. I recognize how delicate that area is and how many external interests are at play.
Absolutely. And while NATO enlargement increases the collective capacity of our defensive alliance, it also increases some of the complexities behind maintaining a unified front, as I'm sure you're well aware. A significant example can be seen by Turkey's concerns regarding Finland and Sweden's accession into the alliance. And so my question for you, sir, is, if confirmed, you will serve as NATO's Supreme Allied Commander. How do you see you fostering an environment that continues to promote unity and cohesion among very unique and sometimes very different member nations?
Senator, I think in terms of fostering the right climate, the first step is to remember that the military arm of NATO is only one part of NATO. It is an essential, it is a military organization under collective civilian control. The second thing I would say is always to remember that each of those service chiefs represents a sovereign nation's army or a sovereign nation's military, and to treat them with the respect accordingly. And then finally, to consult with them routinely and to build consensus as I can.
Great. Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Scott, please.
Thank you, Chair Reed. General, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service.
Hello, Senator.
Thank you for the visit we had. We talked, I visited just recently. I went to Europe and visited with American troops in Germany and Lithuania. I went to Germany, Poland, and Lithuania. Clearly, I was impressed with what our troops are willing to do, and also from what the conversation I had, I was impressed with our Eastern European allies, what they're going. They clearly see the threat, and it's important to them. They're clear they need our support. They can't do this on their own. There's no nation like the United States. There's no military that's like ours. So I think it's clear that the security of not only Europe, but the security interests of our country is that we've got to stop these tyrants like Xi and Putin and others from trying to control the world. It doesn't appear that the Biden administration did everything they could because Putin to deter Putin, because he clearly invaded. It seems like we did the same thing. Obama did the same thing back in 2014, and so it's put us in a tough position. Also, it doesn't appear that we're doing enough to deter Communist China because they're continuing to do threats against Taiwan. And if none of us want to send men and women to fight, but we're going to end up that way if we don't stop these guys. So in your professional judgment, given your many years of military service, do you believe the U.S. can deter enemy regimes like Russia and China and Iran if we don't demonstrate even greater military capabilities and a very united political will?
Senator, I believe that all instruments of national power are necessary parts of deterrence, of an integrated deterrence posture. That includes the military, it includes the diplomatic, the informational, the economic. And I agree that political will is a necessary thing to demonstrate in order to achieve deterrence.
What does the European Command need more to try to deter Putin, make sure he doesn't win in Ukraine, and also he doesn't ever invade a NATO ally?
Yes, sir. So I think the first thing and the most important thing that the European Command needs to continue to deter is continued unity of the alliance, continued political will of the alliance, which we're seeing in abundance right now. We need to keep that going. I think that's the first step. The second step is we need the continued support of the armed services to provide us with the capabilities that we need. So those are the two things I think we have there.
Do you think it makes sense to reposition some of our troops further to the east rather than have so much of it concentrated in Germany?
Sir, as you know, in response to this crisis, we have done exactly that. The alliance has repositioned 4 battle groups forward into southeastern Europe, and many nations have bilaterally reinforced their forces. For example, we have reinforced Latvia. The UK has reinforced their battle groups in Estonia. The Germans have reinforced their battle group in Lithuania. And the US has added additional forces into Eastern Europe as well. So I think that's exactly what we have done in response to this crisis, sir.
Even with Sweden and Finland not being part of NATO, do we have a good working relationship with their military?
Sir, we have very good working relationships with their military. We work very closely with the Swedish military on specific technical things, but also in general on exercises. With the Finnish Army, I think I just brought 2 Stryker troops back from Finland, and a parachute battalion is on its way to Finland on routine exercise later this summer. Yes, sir. I think they'll be very easy to integrate.
What would you like to see in addition to what our European allies are doing in Europe to help Ukraine? Anything that they should be doing that they're not doing today?
Sir, I think we should keep doing what we're doing today. As we talk more and more with our Ukrainian colleagues, we get the opportunity to understand better and better what it is they need and how they plan to use it. And so I think I think we're moving in the right direction. I think the question of what happens on the far end to Ukraine after the conflict concludes, however it will conclude, I think is going to be a very important question for Europe as well as for our country.
Thanks for your service.
Sir, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Scott. Senator Rosen, when she gets settled, will have the floor.
you, sir. Senator.
Good morning, General. Good to see you again. Thank you, Chairman Reed, for holding this hearing, and it's so nice to have a great conversation with you last week. I'm glad to see you here this morning. So I guess we'll just get right into it. You know, I worry about cyber, so Russian cyber threats. And, you know, we were talking about that just last week, the importance of maintaining our collective vigilance in the face of Russian cyber threats. So earlier this month, Cybercom Commander General Nakasone, he did say a cyber mission force hunt forward team traveled to Ukraine in December to help them build resilience against cyber attacks, but still, unfortunately, Russia's launched destructive cyber attacks against Ukraine. So if confirmed, how will you work with Cybercom to enhance the cybersecurity capacity of Ukraine, our other European partners, including through the Hunt Forward operations?
Thank you, Senator. If I'm confirmed, I will continue to work with General Nakasone and all of his components. Of course, the 16th U.S. Air Force under Tim Hawk currently runs cyber operations for U.S. Eucom, do a great job. I think General Nakasone's command has set up some great models throughout Europe in terms of defending forward, hunting forward, and doing it in collaboration with our partners or our allies. And I would very much look forward to pursuing all of those with him. It's going to be of critical importance as we go forward, Senator.
Well, that's great. You led me into my next question, because what do you assess NATO's overall cyberspace capabilities and our alliances, our just readiness together to respond to any attacks?
I think the alliance has collectively begun. We have established a cyber center in Estonia, for example, and are working towards cyber strategies. But clearly, just like for all of our countries individually, there's much work to be done for the entire alliance collectively on this. If I'm confirmed, it will be one of the things I turn my attention to first.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I'm going to move down a little bit to the Black Sea, because Russia is maintaining a blockade of the Ukrainian coast. It now controls a number of strategic ports in the Black Sea, and Ukraine actually exports 70% of its cargo through there. So last month, Russia said it's in the second phase of its invasion. It's going to include targeting those Ukrainian southern regions, potentially neighboring Moldova. So what, if confirmed, what actions would you take to mitigate those threats on the Black Sea, and what more can NATO be doing? What can you be doing together to, again, we have the coast, equip us there?
Senator, first I would point out that there are 3 NATO nations that border the Black Sea, that have shores on the Black Sea, and each has a navy. I would also agree that the problem of exporting or not exporting grain from Ukraine right now is an important problem, not just for Ukraine, but for the world, and because of that, for us as well. What I would do, if confirmed as SACEUR or as Commander U.S. Eucom, is provide the military options required by our civilian leaders. Clearly, the way we approach that would have to be a whole-of-government approach, which may or may not include a military component.
And so, building on that, I know in this setting, can you speak on anything more specifically about how we should be preparing in the Black Sea for this potential incursion, if you will?
Ma'am, I think the first thing that we've been doing is probably the most important, and it's not in the Black Sea. It's establishing alternative ways to get the grain out. So Deutsche Bahn, the German national train company, has been conducting massive lifts of grain out of Ukraine right now, coming out through Poland, then up to the northern Germany ports for export. Romania has opened the Port of Constanta for outflow, which goes through the Black Sea, but not through a blockaded portion of the Black Sea. So I think it's going to be a combination of modes of transportation that we're going to have to use, and I look forward to contributing to it.
And I know I only have 20 seconds left, but I just want to ask a little bit about if Sweden and Finland join NATO, what kind of security guarantees do you think we should provide for NATO for Sweden and Finland if they do join NATO and Article 5 protections kick in?
Ma'am, obviously the security guarantees and the nature of the security guarantees that we or anybody would provide would be a policy matter. I can state that as a military matter, we're in a position to back up any guarantees across the European landmass.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Rosen. And General, thank you for your testimony today, your service to the nation, which is a proud family tradition. And I think you've demonstrated quite clearly why you should be confirmed and continue the leadership that General Walters has shown in facing this grave crisis in Ukraine. With that, I will adjourn the hearing. Thank you, General.
Senator.